You can hear the footsteps long before you see her, sandals slapping against dusty stone, rhythmic, tired, indifferent. She's been up since the sky was still black. There's no clock in her tiny rented room, but she knows time by instinct, by how the baker's oven has just started to smoke, by how the wine merchants haven't yet unpacked their carts, by how the Subura is still quiet. She has a job to do, and that job is sex. At least, Tviv says what people say. But here's the thing. When you really look at the daily life of Roman prostitutes, what you find isn't just a series of sexual transactions. What you find is labor, routine, performance, negotiation, violence, boredom, adaptation. It's a job, yes, but it's also a whole way of surviving in a world built by men for men and policed by men. In a city obsessed with status, honor, and control, prostitutes lived on the edge of visibility, used, ignored, mocked, and feared, and yet they were everywhere. This story isn't about titillation. It's about presence, what it meant to live in that skin, in that time, what it meant to wake up each day in Rome with nothing but your body to sell and your wits to keep you alive. Let's start with the basics. Prostitution in ancient Rome. A legal job, a dirty reputation. Rome didn't ban prostitution, quite the opposite. It regulated it. If you wanted to be a prostitute, all you had to do was register with the Atticals, the local magistrates. You'd give your name, your address, and your declared profession, meretrix, the Latin word for she who earns. Once registered, you are now officially a sex worker in the eyes of the state. This protected clients from fraud more than it protected the prostitutes themselves. The job was legal, taxable, and utterly dishonorable. And that's the contradiction at the heart of Roman sex work. It was tolerated, even necessary, but socially toxic. A proper Roman matron, respectable, modest, loyal, was expected to be the opposite of a prostitute in every way. Where the matron stayed indoors, the prostitute was in the streets. Where the matron belonged to one man, the prostitute was available to all. Where the matron was veiled and hidden, the prostitute was dressed to be noticed. That's why a registered meretrix couldn't sue for rape. She had, legally speaking, surrendered her bodily dignity. She couldn't marry a senator. She couldn't wear the stola, the long draped garment that marked a woman as respectable. Instead, she wore the tunicula, a short, revealing tunic that made her status visible. Her job was public. Her shame was public. Her life was public. The spectrum of Roman sex work. Now, when we say Roman prostitute, it's easy to imagine one narrow type, a desperate woman working a brothel in some dingy alley. But in reality, sex work in Rome was a whole spectrum. At the bottom were enslaved women with no say in the matter. They were sex slaves, rented out by owners or pimps, sometimes barely teenagers. They had no choice, no freedom, and often no names. They were kept in the cheapest brothels or paraded outside taverns and bathhouses. Then came the low-tier meretrices, freed women or poor citizens trying to survive. Some worked in Lupanars, Rome's legal brothels. Others plied their trade in doorways, on street corners, or near public baths. They competed with tavern girls, dancers, and flute players, who often combined performance with sex work. Higher up were the delicatae and famose, courtesans who catered to the rich. These women were educated, eloquent, and expensive. They knew poetry, gossip, politics. Their company was as valuable as their bodies. Some even had long-term relationships with powerful men. But make no mistake, even the richest courtesan could never fully shake off the stink of her profession in polite society. Then there were men. Male sex workers existed in every tier, from boy slaves in bathhouses to professional gigolos catering to elite Roman women or men. But like their female counterparts, they walked a fine line between entertainment and disgrace. Workplaces of the trade. Prostitution happened everywhere in Rome, sometimes blatantly, sometimes subtly. The brothel, or Lupanar, was the most obvious. These were small, cramped buildings with stone beds, dirty linen, and erotic wall paintings. You walked in, pointed at what you wanted, paid a coin or two, and left. No one stayed long. There was no privacy, no comfort, just business. But many prostitutes didn't work in brothels. Some operated out of taverns. Others used the front rooms of private homes or bathhouses. Some lootered under porticos, especially near the Circus Maximus or the Forum. Certain trees and columns became unofficial work zones, known by locals for what they offered. There was no shortage of customers. Rome was a city of men with time, money, and urges, and few social limits on how they spent any of it. Why it wasn't set just about sex. Here's what most people forget. Sex wasn't always the main draw. Some clients came for conversation, flattery, emotional intimacy, or even a bit of drama. Rome was a world of strict rules and rigid expectations. Inside that world, prostitutes offered something rare: freedom to say what you wanted, be who you wanted, or take what you couldn't get anywhere else. For many prostitutes, that meant learning to read people fast, knowing when to flatter and when to shut up, knowing who wanted dominance and who just wanted to cry, knowing when to fake interest and when to escape. It was as much psychological labor as it was physical. And then there was safety. It was a brutal profession. Beatings were common. So was theft. So was murder. And no one cared. So was the law of remembers and the law of his end. Neither were the gods, if you believed the public priests. So prostitutes relied on each other, on bribes, on wit, on routine, a day in her life. So what did a Roman prostitute actually do all day? That's the question this project will answer, not with generalities, but through stories. Each story will follow one type of prostitute: poor, rich, enslaved, retired, male, female, sacred, secular. Each will be told like a quiet day in the life, narrated with care, grounded in historical fact, but colored with human imagination. The aim isn't to sensationalize, but to humanize. We'll walk beside her at dawn, sit with her during awkward silences, watch her count coins, dodge insults, nurse bruises, whisper secrets, remember old lovers, and wonder what tomorrow will bring. You'll hear what she hears, smell what she smells, feel what she endures, and maybe, if we've done this right, you'll see her not as a footnote, but as a full person, someone who lived, someone who worked, someone who mattered, even if history didn't say so. It starts before light. It has to. The Subura never truly sleeps, but there's a moment just before the bakers start kneading dough, before the fishmongers unload their carts, when the air holds its breath. That's when she moves. Quick, quiet, forgettable. She doesn't live in a domus or even a proper insula. Her space is a partitioned corner in the upper floor of a crumbling tenement, 4 levels above a wine shop and a urine collector. The walls sweat moisture. The floor creaks like it might collapse. She doesn't care. Rent is cheap, and she's alive. Her name doesn't matter, not because she lacks one, but because she's given up on using it. Most clients don't ask. If they do, she lies. Livia, Sierra, Bologna, whatever suits their fantasy. Her real name is for her own thoughts, and she doesn't indulge those often. She pisses in a pot, splashes cold water on her face, rubs her teeth with ash, and chews a bit of mint. No mirror, no makeup, just a rag dipped in oil to give her skin some glow under torchlight. She wears a faded tunica, cut deliberately short, not flattering, just practical, too long, and it looks like you're hiding something. Too clean, and they'll think you're expensive. She ties a cord under her breasts, the Roman version of cleavage, adjusts a bronze bulla around her neck, worn more out of habit than belief. Then she counts her coins. Last night's take, 2 asses and a semis, enough for bread, lentils, and a handful of vinegar wine, barely. She tucks a small knife into her belt. Not for show, for necessity. Outside, the city breathes its first fumes of the day. Smoke from chimney holes, urine from alley corners, rotten figs, wet stone, human sweat baked into the walls. She walks fast, but not too fast. Hurrying marks you as nervous, slow, but not lazy. She knows the rhythm of this district, the exact hour the bread shops light their ovens, the names of every rat-faced pimp loitering near the baths, and which columns to avoid if you don't want to be cornered by a drunken night guard. Her usual spot is near a public fountain, not too close to the forum. Guards patrol there, but just near enough to catch men staggering home from dice games or bathhouses. The fountain provides light, sound, and a reason to loiter. She blends in with the crowd, fruit sellers, beggars, porters, and the other women doing the same job. They don't talk much. That would make it a gang, and that's illegal. She picks her first client before he picks her. He's mid-30s, toga slipping off one shoulder, drunk but not gone. The kind who wants to feel powerful because his wife spat at him this morning. She smiles, not too much, hooks a finger around the cord of her tunic. No words. He follows. They duck into an alley. It's quick. He's too tired to bother with conversation. He finishes, fumbles with his purse, hands her a copper as. She waits for a second coin. He waves her off. She doesn't argue. Not now. He stumbles away. She checks her hem for blood, snot, or worse, none. Good. A few more passers-by glance her way. Some laugh. One spits. She ignores them all. She checks the sky. Still purple. Not yet dawn. Good. Plenty of time. Pause. Here's what you need to understand. For women like her, every hour is a calculation. Where to stand, how to look, when to speak, when to disappear. She's not protected by law. If a man attacks her, there's no magistrate who'll care. She can't press charges. She can't own property. She can't refuse. Not really. If she fights back too hard, she could be accused of theft or assault. If she's too passive, she might not wake up tomorrow. So she learns to read the smallest signs, a twitch of the eye, A clench in the jaw, the angle of a man's sandals on the cobblestones. She adapts quickly. The second client is old, very old. His hands shake when he unrolls the cloth pouch holding his coins, but his money is clean. She walks with him to a recessed doorway. He wants to talk. He talks about his wife, dead, his daughters, married, his slave, runaway. She nods when needed, smiles once. He touches her shoulder like it means something. Then he asks if she'll lie down. She doesn't usually, not in the dirt, but he adds another coin. She does. It hurts. He apologizes. She nods again. Later, when he's done, he says thank you. That happens sometimes, not often. She says nothing. She wants to go wash, but the fountain's already crowded now, and it's still early. She goes back to her spot, waits. And that's most of the morning. Wait, work, wipe, walk, walk, repeat. She learns to gauge if a man's worth her time by the way he scratches his beard, the clink of his coin pouch, the look he gives her tunic. By midday, she's done 6 clients. Some were decent, some were cruel. One tried to stiff her until she yelled loud enough to attract attention. Another gave her an old amulet for luck. She pocketed it, not because she believes in luck, but because he might be back, and it's easier to lie if you kept the gift. Now she seps hungry. But first, she heads to the bakery. Not the expensive one, just a stall that sells day-old loaves. She trades 3 asses for a round of bread and a sour date cake. The seller knows what she is, doesn't care. She eats in the shadow of a warehouse, feet tucked under her tunic, chewing slow. A boy runs past her, yells something crude. She chews slower. This is where we'll pause the first section, before the sun rises, on the edge of heat, noise, and noon. In the next section, the client parade, will follow her through the chaos of the Roman afternoon. That's when the soldiers start drinking, the shopkeepers close up, and tempers get short. It's the most dangerous time of day, and for a streetwalker in the Subura, danger is always just one corner away. The sun is directly overhead now, and the Subura feels like it's boiling. Smells get sharper. Tempers do too. She moves from the fountain to a shadowed alcove near the steps of a balnea, a public bath. The warm stone radiates heat through her soles. Her armpits are damp. Her thighs itch from the grime of the last encounter. But she doesn't complain. There's no point. Complaining is for people someone listens to. This time of day, the streets become a kind of theater. The parade begins. The first wave comes from the baths. Men relaxed, clean, oiled, wealthier than her morning clients, but not always better. One approaches, balding, thick with muscle, stinking of cinnamon oil. He grabs her wrist before speaking. She hates that. He says nothing for a while, just squeezes, then grins, lets go and walks on, testing her, or maybe just reminding her that he could have hurt her if he wanted to. Second man, younger, a freedman by the look of his cheap ring and confident stride. She recognizes him. He came to her 2 nights ago, drunk and crying. Now he acts like he's never seen her before. She doesn't take it personally. Most clients are like that, ashamed by daylight, bold only in shadow. By early afternoon, she's had 4 more men. One was rough. One barely finished before apologizing and running off. One smelled like goat piss. One gave her a dried fig, along with 2 asses. She ate the fig. How the deal works. There's no script. Every negotiation is fast, instinctive, and invisible to outsiders. She doesn't advertise prices aloud. That's dangerous. It marks you, draws attention, sometimes from pimps or guards looking for bribes. Instead, she uses gestures, a subtle lift of the tunic hem, a tilt of the head, the pause after a question. If a man doesn't understand, he's not worth her time. Prices vary wildly. A quick encounter might be as single as a nearly worthless bronze coin. Something more involved or unusual could earn her a denarius, which is rare and never refused. She never asks for one, but she hopes payment comes first. Always. No coin, no touch, unless he's dangerous. Then she smiles, lies, and finds an excuse to leave, not always successfully. She carries her coins in a cloth tied inside her tunic, away from easy fingers. Twice, she's been robbed. Once by a client, once by another woman pretending to be friendly. She learned fast. Other women, same job. She's not alone on the streets. There are others, older, younger, thinner, louder. One has elaborate Egyptian tattoos and paints her lips with crushed berries. Another carries a sick baby, pretending to beg, but willing to trade anything for coins. One girl can't be more than 13, probably a slave. They don't compete directly. Not exactly. It's more like parallel survival. Occasionally, someone will hiss a warning. Don't go near the wine shop. Lucius is back. Or that man in the red cloak doesn't pay. These exchanges are rare, but they matter. There's a quiet, invisible code, fragmented sisterhood held together by necessity. There are also pimps. Not all women are independent. Some answer to men who wait in the shadows or loiter near taverns. These men take half the coin, or more. They promise protection. Most deliver fear instead. She doesn't have one. Not officially. There was a time long ago when she did. A man with promises, then fists. She left. She got lucky. Or maybe he just found someone younger. The bored ones. Not all clients come for sex. Some just want to talk, or be seen, or do something cruel. One man, she calls him the philosopher, shows up twice a week, always after his midday meal, always after wine. He pays her as single as just to sit with him on a public bench. Then he talks about stoicism, death, the movement of stars. Sometimes he cries, sometimes he stares at her breasts while quoting Seneca. She nods. She listens. He gives her the same coin every time, worn and smooth. Once, he gave her a peach. Once, a used pair of sandals. She kept neither. He hasn't tried to touch her in months. Not since she made it clear that his money buys time, not flesh. Still, he accepts better company than most. An argument. A threat. Late afternoon now. The street grows loud. Shouts from vendors. Laughter from bathhouse boys. Clatter from mule carts. She's halfway through a negotiation with a new client. Lean, suspicious eyes. Iron ring on his finger, when another man interrupts. He steps between them, says she belongs to him. Total fabrication. The client hesitates. She tries to redirect, to salvage the deal. Too late. The second man throws a coin at her feet and spits. He doesn't want her. He just wanted to ruin the deal. This is territory warfare. Not official, not enforced, but real. She glares. He stares back. then walks off. She picks up the coin. It seems genuine. She adds it to her pouch. When boys turn to men, sometimes she gets young ones, teenagers, nervous and full of bluster, sons of freedmen, apprentices spending stolen wages. Once, a soldier barely old enough to hold his own sword. These clients are strange. Some want to prove something. Some just want to ask questions. One cried after his first time, said he didn't know it would feel so. She told him it sets always like that. He didn't set to come back. Fading light. The sun begins to tilt. Shadows stretch long. The air cools slightly. She counts her take 13 asses, 2 semises, a chipped bronze ring, and a sprig of rosemary tied with string. Why the rosemary? No clue. Some gesture of thanks or a joke. She doesn't throw it away. She rubs her thighs, adjusts her tunic, walks toward a water basin near the tavern, washes her hands, wipes her mouth. One more pass through the street before sunset. Soon the night men will appear, the ones who wait for dark to lower their decency. She'll return to her spot. Or maybe not. Maybe tonight she'll skip work and buy a warm cup of lentil stew. A luxury. Her back aches. Her feet burn, but she's alive. She has coins. That's enough. Tomorrow will come. And she says do it all again. The sun's gone. Rome hasn't gotten quieter, just different. By day, the Subura is commerce, labor, and survival. By night, it's wine, shouting, slaps, and songs. Most of the shops are closed. The smell of cooked onions and spilled fish guts rises from the gutters, and from every alley comes the sound of men pretending to forget who they are. She knows this version of the city. It's the one where no one pretends to be decent. No more togas, no legal titles, no daytime roles to perform, just bodies with appetites and fists and coin. She works still, not because she wants to, but because night brings customers she can't afford to ignore. A familiar routine, a different kind of risk. She's moved closer to the Pompeii now, a wine shop that spills half-drunk men into the streets every hour or so. She doesn't go inside. Too dangerous. The innkeeper demands a cut, and the men inside are too far gone to tell coin from knife. Instead, she leans against the wall outside, just under a flickering oil lamp nailed to a wooden beam. Her shadow stretches long and thin on the plaster. She waits. The first client is already slurring. He wants her to come somewhere special. She says no. She never goes far from the street. She has rules. Bend them too often, you disappear. He insists. She repeats herself. He calls her a dog, then a whore. She shrugs. She's heard worse. He throws his wine cup at the wall, walks away. She doesn't flinch. She marks his face in her memory, just in case. A pause that isn't set rest. At this hour, she doesn't move much. Better to be still and visible than roaming and vulnerable. She squats near a broken pillar, pulls her cloak tighter, not for modesty, for warmth. Roman nights bite harder when you're hungry. She eats nothing tonight. Bread's gone. No time to buy more. She sips water from a clay flask, keeps an eye on movement around her, watches for soldiers off duty, young men in groups, or drunk patricians who think the night belongs to them. She sees another woman across the way. Older, her tunic ripped at the hem, one sandal missing. She's sitting on a crate, head down. not working, either sick or beaten. No one checks, everyone notices. No one checks. This is how Rome treats the women it uses most. Stray thoughts between customers. She doesn't daydream often, not during work, but night invites reflection, and her mind slips. She thinks about her mother. Dead, probably. Sold once, then sold again. She remembers a lullaby in a language she hasn't spoken since childhood. She hums part of it under her breath. She thinks about a man who used to come see her once a week, wore perfume, told her she had clever eyes, paid double, then he stopped showing up. She imagines he died, or married, or just got bored. She tells herself she doesn't care. It's mostly true. She wonders how long she can keep doing this, how many more winters her knees can handle, what happens when she gets sick, what happens when the younger girls, brighter, louder, newer, take all the men she used to count on. There's no retirement for women like her, just luck or death. A client who breaks the pattern. Close to midnight now. She's thinking about heading home. Then he appears, well-dressed, alone, sober, unusual. He doesn't grab her or shout. He asks if she has time. She watches him closely. This type can be dangerous, the quiet ones. The ones who pretend they're not doing what they're doing. She nods. He offers 2 asses without bargaining. Then 3. He wants to talk. She doesn't believe him, but agrees. She gets tired. They sit near the steps of a shuttered shop. He tells her about a dead brother, about how he used to be cruel and now regrets it. He doesn't cry. He doesn't leer. After a while, he asks if she believes in fate. She says she believes in coin. He smiles. They sit for a while longer. She doesn't say much. She lets him speak. Then he leaves. No tricks, no attempt to follow, just leaves. She watches him go. She doesn't know what to make of it. Walking home, the streets have thinned. Less noise, just dogs and shadows, and the distant thrum of a drumbeat from some party uphill. She walks fast. Her feet ache. Her lower back's on fire. She's made enough today. Not great, but enough. She passes a cart with rotten pears. A man sleeping with his head against the wheel. A dog eating something that used to be alive. She turns a corner, climbs uneven stairs, reaches her tenement. At the landing, she fumbles with the latch. Her fingers are stiff. She finally gets it open. Inside the same, always the same. A small mat, a broken amphora for washing, a sackcloth she pulls over herself at night. She lights a stub of tallow. Its smoke curls like incense. She undresses, checks her thighs. One bruise, not bad. Her ankle's swollen. She rubs it gently. Then she lays down. Before sleep, her eyes don't set close right away. She counts coins again. 19 asses, 3 semises, 1 quadrans, or small piece of salt pork from a grateful client, a charm shaped like a phallus meant to ward off evil. She thinks about the other women on the street, wonders which ones will still be alive next month, wonders if anyone ever thinks about them when they aren't being bought. She thinks about not waking up. It wouldn't be tragic, just simple, one less day. But then she hears someone crying on the stairs below, a woman's voice. Young, probably new to the work. She listens for a moment, then turns onto her side. She whispers her name, her real name, the one no client has ever heard. She says it just once. Then she lets herself sleep. This time we're not in the open streets. We're inside the walls of a Roman brothel, specifically Pompeii's famous Lupanar, one of the best preserved brothels in the ancient world, with beds, wall graffiti, and erotic frescoes still intact. This gives us something rare in history, a physical, visual sense of what daily life might have looked like for the women inside. She wakes up to torchlight flickering on faded frescoes. Her bed is a slab of stone. Her job is older than the city itself. This is a day in the life of a woman owned, rented, and recorded in graffiti, whose only freedom is the story she tells herself. She wakes to the sound of a drunk man snoring. It's not unusual. Some clients pass out after paying, some don't pay, then pass out anyway. Either way, she waits until the snoring is heavy and deep, then nudges him with her foot. Nothing. Still asleep. She reaches for his tunic, checks for a coin pouch. Checks for a coin pouch. Empty. Typical. She sighs and lets him lie there. The room is still dark, but the sky is lightening. Early morning, time to clean up. She pulls her tunica over her head, wraps her hair with a strip of wool, and splashes water from a cracked jar. No soap, just enough to rinse last night off her thighs. The stone bed is hard and always cold. She tucks the linen roll back into the corner. This is her space, one of 5 cramped rooms in the Lupanar. The walls are smeared with oil and old fluids. The graffiti around her bed reads, "Felix screwed Claudia for 2 asses. Best I've had. Don't set waste time with Vita. Go to Fortunata." She's neither Claudia nor Fortunata, just another name in the rotation. They call her Callista. It's not her real name, but it works well enough. It means most beautiful, ironic, or aspirational, depends on the day. The brothel seps bones. The Lupanar itself is 2 stories, built like a stable for humans. 10 tiny rooms, no windows, just doors and stone platforms meant to be beds. Each has a mattress, if you're lucky, maybe a thin blanket. Some clients don't care. Others complain. Some bring their own linens. The walls are covered in frescoes, explicit scenes of every sexual position imaginable. Not for decoration, for advertising. A visual menu for men too drunk, foreign, or illiterate to describe what they want. There's a narrow hallway, a central atrium where customers wait, and a wooden bench outside where men loiter and joke about who they'll try next. At the door stands the Leno, the pimp or brothel keeper. In her case, it's an older Greek freedman named Dorian. He doesn't smile. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. He collects half of everything they earn and handles bribes to local patrols. He doesn't care what happens inside the rooms, only that the money keeps coming. Her schedule. There is no official start time. When men start drinking, work begins. That could be late morning, could be noon, could be before breakfast, depending on the day. She doesn't leave the building often. When she does, it's with permission, a trip to the public fountain, maybe a visit to the apothecary for oil or herbs. But she's expected to stay visible, available, and presentable. There's steps a rhythm to the place. Mid-morning is slow. The early clients have either passed out or wandered off. The real rush begins after the bathhouses let out. Clean men, hungry for sex. Then comes the lunchtime crowd, Workers on break, merchants passing through. They come in waves. She's had days with one client. She's had days with 15. Some come for novelty. Some are regulars. One man, a baker with red hands and broken nails, sees her every day's attorney. He brings her a bit of honeyed bread, never stays long, always pays. Another, a young man barely out of boyhood, insists on calling her Flora. It was his mother's name. He doesn't talk about that part, just asks her to sing. She does. It's extra coin, and she doesn't hate his voice. The tools of the trade. She keeps a small wooden box hidden in a loose stone near her bed. Inside a comb, a bit of rouge for her cheeks, 2 bone hairpins, and a tiny vial of oil infused with lavender. Clients expect softness, scent, clean skin. She does her best with what little she has. She rubs oil into her arms. It hides the smell of sweat and keeps her skin from cracking. She wears the same tunica most days. It's dyed a deep red, cheap pigment, but eye-catching. In Roman eyes, red is for lust, for sex, for women who've stepped outside the bounds of decency. It suits her. She doesn't wear jewelry. Anything nice would be stolen. But sometimes, if a man brings a trinket, a ribbon, a bangle, she'll wear it for the day, just to feel different. She fakes pleasure well. Not for every man, just the ones who tip more when they think she likes it. She moans when it counts, breathes heavy, makes eye contact. Some men want eye contact, others demand you look away. She adapts. She always adapts. Co-workers and rivalries. She's not the only one here. The Lupanar houses 5 women full-time, and a few others who drift in and out. Fortunata, the oldest, keeps a stash of clove oil and helps clean up after sick clients. Claudia claims she once slept with a senator's cousin. Vita is 17 and already bitter. Sabina is new, still learning which men bite and which ones beg. They don't fight often. Fighting brings punishment, and none of them want that. But there's tension. If a man asks for someone by name, the others feel it. Envy is quiet, sharp, and constant. Still, they talk. Share warnings. Lend each other thread and oil. They know they're not friends, but they're in the same cage, and that counts for something. Lunch, if you can call it that. By early afternoon, Dorian gives them a short break, not out of kindness, just practicality. Tired women make less money. She eats lentils from a shared pot, dips stale bread in garum, and drinks lukewarm wine. It's enough. She sits on the steps outside, in the shadow of the brothel wall. Her legs ache, her hips are sore. She adjusts her tunic, scratches at a bug bite, and watches passers-by glance at the doorway and look away. Respectable Romans pretend this building doesn't exist. They call it a necessary evil, but they know exactly where it is. She leans back, listens to the sound of carts, coins, sandals, smells the sulfur air of Pompeii's streets. Inside, someone's already moaning, either performance or pain, maybe both. She swallows her last bite of bread and stands. Work isn't done. The second half of the day is about to begin. The afternoon rush always begins the same way. The man with the limp arrives just after midday, same as always. He never knocks, just pushes open her door like he owns the place. He smells of vinegar and old sweat, his tunic stained under the arms. He never speaks. He lays down 2 copper asses on the ledge, motions for her to lie back, and undresses in silence. She knows better than to speak, laugh, or delay. He doesn't like questions, doesn't like talking, and he's fast, always done, within 5 minutes. When he finishes, he grabs the coins and leaves. Not everyone pays up front. Some pay after. Some don't pay at all. But he always leaves 2 more copper coins in the hallway for Dorian. That's why she tolerates him. That, and he never hits. That Sep's not nothing, patterns in flesh. The next man is the opposite, a talker. His name is Lucius, or at least that's what he says. She doubts it's real. Lucius always brings figs. He eats half of them while undressing, smacks his lips like a goat chewing cud, and compliments her body as if reciting a script. You serve her the sweetest plum in all of Campania, he says every time. Then you serve her wasted in this place. She nods, smiles, pretends to be flattered. She even fakes a little gasp when he finishes early. He kisses her forehead like a lover, then waddles out, humming a tune. She lies still for a moment, sticky with sweat, juice, and words she didn't ask for. It's just another transaction, but sometimes the wrong word sticks in her head for hours after. Wasted, she doesn't know if he meant it kindly or cruelly. Unwritten rules. She's learned the brothel's rhythms, like a priestess learns ritual. Early afternoon brings laborers, coarse hands, quick tempers, short visits. By mid-afternoon, you start getting the soldiers, drunk, bold, loud. They slap, boast, grab. You don't say no. You just try not to bruise. There's one soldier, Gaius, maybe, who's kinder than the rest. He brings extra oil sometimes, asks if she's eaten, asks before touching. Once, he brought her a small wooden comb. I carved it, he said, for your hair. She knew better than to accept gifts without strings, but she took it, keeps it under her mattress, wrapped in linen, never uses it, just likes knowing it's there. Later, as the sun begins to sink and the shadows grow long, the merchants show up. These are the men who negotiate everything, even sex. One tries to haggle her down to half price. It's Sep's late, he says. Surely you stir tired. It'll take 15 minutes and be gone. She stares at him flatly, then pay for 15 minutes. He laughs and throws down a coin. She lets him in, doesn't speak the whole time, just stares at the wall, where a fresco shows a woman straddling a man, both painted smiling. She wonders who painted that, who posed for it, if the smile was ever real. Sabina's desk scream. In the room beside hers, someone screams. Not a moan, not a giggle. A real scream. It Sep's Sabina, the new girl. Claudia rushes in first. Then Vita, the man, bald, red-faced, wheezing, staggers out, clutching his belt. Blood on his arm. Sabina bit him. Dorian appears seconds later. Doesn't ask questions. Just slaps her. Hard. Sabina doesn't cry. Just clutches her tunic and glares at the wall. She won't talk about it. But later, when it's quiet, she slips into Callista's room and curls up on the bed without speaking. Callista holds her, frums her back, says nothing. They're not friends. But sometimes, silence is safer than words. The money count. Evening approaches. The air cools slightly. Torches are lit in the hallway. The smell of oil and ash mixes with sweat. Callista checks her corner for coins. Today, 7 bronze asses and a single denarius. That's rare. Someone must have paid extra, or by mistake. She does instead feel lucky, just numb. She'll keep half. Dorian takes the rest. That's the deal. She tucks the money into a pouch sewn into her tunic lining. She'll use it to buy more oil tomorrow, maybe bread, maybe a ribbon if she's feeling foolish. Once, she tried saving, hid a few coins each week in a crack behind a fresco. When she had enough to pay for 2 weeks of freedom, she planned to run to Nemapolis, maybe, or Capua, but the stash disappeared. Dorian never mentioned it, just looked at her one morning with a cold grin and said, "Dreams are expensive." She hasn't tried again since. Strangers with familiar eyes. The last client of the day surprises her. He steps young, clean, well-spoken. He doesn't leer or joke or boast. Just hands over 2 denarii and says, "Tid like to lie down." That Sep's all. She raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Opens the door. He lies down beside her, fully clothed, breathes deeply, doesn't touch her. After a while, he says, "You remind me of someone." She doesn't ask who. He falls asleep. She doesn't wake him, just lies there, eyes open, watching the flicker of torchlight on the stone wall. When he wakes, he thanks her and leaves without a word. She finds another denarius on the ledge. 3 silver coins in 1 day. It's the most she's made in weeks. She should feel proud, but she just feels tired. What they never see. No one sees her after hours, after the clients leave, after the coins are split, after the lamps are extinguished. She sits on the stone ledge near the back, wraps a cloak around her shoulders, and stares at the dark sky. She hums to herself, a tune her mother once sang, though she barely remembers the words. She imagines walking past the brothel, instead of into it, wearing clean clothes, holding a basket of bread, not hurrying, not hiding. A passerby might see her and think, there's a woman with a name, with a home. She knows it Sep's a lie, but it Sep's a sweet one. And some nights, that Sep's enough. It started with a faint rumble, sometime after noon. At first, no one thought much of it. The walls of the brothel trembled slightly, barely enough to knock over the oil lamp on the ledge. Earthquakes were common here, especially since the big one 17 years ago. People grumbled, rolled their eyes, adjusted the furniture, and went on. Callista felt it in her knees first, then in her ribs, but she kept working. A merchant came in, complaining about the dust outside, said the sky looked wrong. She hadn't noticed. The inner rooms had no windows, just flickering lamplight and air that always smelled of sweat and oil. Then came the noise, a low growl, like a lion beneath the floorboards, long, deep, and unnatural. Sabina burst into the hallway, eyes wide. Is it another quake? Before anyone could answer, a deep thud shook the whole structure. This time, bottles fell. Lamps rolled. Someone screamed. That was the moment it changed. The ash begins. At first, it looked like gray snow. A few of the girls ran outside, then ran back in screaming. The ash was falling from the sky in thick, dry flurries, sticking to their hair, their clothes, their skin. The street outside was already whitening. The air burned to breathe. Dorian stormed into the hallway, yelling at everyone to stay calm. Go back to your rooms. It's Sep's just dust. But the way he paced, eyes darting, jaw tight, told a different story. Someone yelled from the street that the mountain was exploding. A woman across the alley dropped her water jug and ran. Callista didn't move. She felt paralyzed, not with fear, just confusion. The idea of the mountain doing anything other than existing had never occurred to her. Flight and freeze. Within the hour, everything turned to chaos. Clients fled. Shopkeepers dragged shutters closed. Chickens clucked in the streets. Abandoned. Inside the brothel, girls packed whatever coins or clothes they could carry. Some wept, some fought. One girl locked herself in her room and prayed out loud until her voice cracked. Callista stood in her doorway, watching. What are you waiting for? Vita asks, clutching a satchel. We have to go. We still go north. The road sits still open. Callista looked down at her own hands. Empty. She didn't know where north was, and even if she did, where would she go? She had no family, no land, no coin, aside from the few she kept hidden. Her name wasn't even on any records, just a body and a ledger. Come on, Vita screamed. Callista turned away. She stays? By nightfall, Ash was waist deep in the streets. The sky was pitch black. You couldn't see more than a few feet. She stayed in her room, not out of courage or defiance, but because she didn't know what else to do. She lit a lamp, braided her hair, put on her cleanest tunic. Then she lay on her side, facing the fresco. It showed a woman riding a man, her arms thrown back in ecstasy. The paint was cracked now, faded, but it was still beautiful. Callista ran her fingers across the wall. She remembered a story from when she was young, a story about a shepherd who fell asleep under a tree and woke up to find the world turned to salt. She wondered if that Sep's what was happening now. Moments that never finished. At some point, someone banged on the door. She did instead answer. Later she heard heavy footsteps, running. Then nothing. The air inside was growing hot. The ceiling creaked. Dust fell like fine sand with every new tremor. She tried to count her breaths, made it to 240 before the noise outside got too loud. It sounded like wind and fire and screaming all at once, and then it stopped. Silence, total awful silence, frozen in time. They would find her centuries later, perfectly preserved in a hardened bed of ash, curled on her side, one hand stretched toward the wall. They would see the fresco behind her and assume she died mid-service. They wouldn't know she had chosen that pose, that she had lit the lamp herself, that the coins hidden in her tunic were hers, not a client's. They would write academic papers about her, call her the lover of Pompeii, speculate about her profession, her name, her life. But they instead never really know her. They'd never know the feel of ash in the lungs, or what it meant to have nowhere to run, or why a girl with no family might stay in a collapsing building rather than flee into a city that never wanted her. Callista became art, a symbol, a curiosity. Frozen in time? Yes, but not forgotten. Not entirely. Her name, at least the one she used in public, was Livia Athenais, a name designed to sound old and noble. Livia, like the wife of Augustus. Athenais, like the learned women of Greece, but her real name, no one knew, not anymore. It had been years since she'd heard it spoken. She lived in a domus, tucked between the Palatine and the Aventine hills, near enough to the Forum to catch whispers, far enough to avoid the stink of the streets. The property wasn't hers. Technically, it belonged to a freedman who owed her a great debt, but she was the one who hosted senators, artists, and Praetorian tribunes for quiet dinners and games of dice, the one who lit the lamps, ordered the wine, and decided which conversations stayed above the table. The courtesan class. Most prostitutes in Rome were meretrices, common, regulated, visible. They were licensed by the aediles, taxed like tradesmen, and could be found in brothels, alleyways, or at public baths. But courtesans? That was something different. There was no legal class called courtesan, but everyone knew what it meant. These were the educated companions, the ones who didn't stand behind curtains or scratch ads into door frames. They had patrons, not clients, and their value wasn't just in the bedroom, it was in conversation, in discretion, in mystery. Livia had taught herself to read and write by copying letters from a retired grammarian's discarded scrolls. She practiced her posture by watching patrician wives at the theater, learned timing, wit, and flattery from long hours listening to drunken senators wax nostalgic about their youth. It was a performance, always, but one she had mastered. Men who paid for presents. Her nights weren't about sex, not usually, not at first. They were about mood, environment, power. She knew what kind of wine to serve to a man who fancied himself a poet, Falernian vintage, watered just enough to keep his tongue loose. She knew how long to let silence hang before asking casually, "So, what does the emperor really want from Syria?" She never pushed. She just listened. By the time a man was in her bed, she already knew his wife's name, his ambitions, and the name of the tribune blocking his legislation. Pillow talk wasn't about pleasure, it was about leverage. She kept a journal, not for publication, not for art, just notes, names, connections, patterns. A dangerous gift. At first, the secrets she gathered were trivial. Who hated whom? Who was sleeping? With whose wife? Who was paying off the grain officials to get more favorable prices at the docks? But in time, the secrets grew darker. One night, a Praetorian officer drunkenly confessed that there'd been orders to poison a senator. He won't make it to the vote next week, he'd laughed, pouring another cup of wine. Another time, a provincial governor, thinking himself clever, asked Livia if she knew how to forge a wax seal. Just hypothetically, he said. She smiled, filed it away, and the next day she moved the journal to a safer hiding place. The web tightens. Rome was not kind to women who knew too much. If you were poor, you disappeared. If you were rich, they called it madness and locked you away. Livia began to get nervous when people started calling her clever. Not beautiful, not elegant, clever. It was a compliment laced with warning. She stopped taking new clients. She refused meetings with certain senators. When asked, she said she was retiring, thinking of buying land in Etruria. But the city doesn't let women like her retire, not when they might talk. The senator who didn't set laugh. The tipping point came in the form of a man named Gaius Memmius Maximus. a senator from an old family, not especially bright, but ambitious and far more paranoid than he needed to be. He visited her 3 times. The 3rd time, he didn't ask for wine, didn't even sit. "Who have you spoken to about me?" She blinked. "No one." He stepped closer. "You told Tribune Vitellius that I was planning to delay the vote on the grain subsidies." She hadn't. Not exactly, but the moment was already lost. She tried to laugh it off. If I were in the habit of discussing my clients, and Stust be out of business, he didn't laugh. Instead, he left a small pouch on the table. Inside, a single gold coin and a small rolled scroll. When she opened the scroll, there were no words, just a mark, a stylized dagger. Too much power, too little protection. That night, she burned half her notes. She packed a bag, told her steward to ready the carriage. She would head south, she said, to Capua, or perhaps farther, disappear. But disappear into what? She had no legal identity, no husband, no property in her name. Everything she owned was favors, promises, knowledge, and all of that could vanish in a night. She didn't sleep, fade to myth. The next morning, Livia was gone. Some said she fled east, boarded a ship to Alexandria under a false name. Others said she was taken by hired men before sunrise, her body dumped in the Tiber, her journal buried with her. And some said she never existed at all, that she was an invention, a fiction whispered among imperial guards and senators as a cautionary tale. But then, years later, a sealed wooden box turned up in a villa cellar near Capua. Inside, scraps of parchment, coded in Greek and Latin shorthand, names, dates, locations. Historians still argue over its authenticity, but one entry, marked with a small drawing of a dagger, simply read, "Power never lies in the bed. It lies in what you remember after." She remembered 2 things from that day: the smell of fish guts from the nearby stall and the weight of her father's hand letting go of hers. They didn't call it selling. Not exactly. Her father had said it was an arrangement, a friend of a friend who owed someone a favor. A man named Gallo met them in an alley behind a wine shop, squinted at her, then nodded once. The coin purse changed hands. Her father walked away without looking back, and she was left standing between 2 women in painted faces and threadbare togas who smelled like vinegar and wax. One of them looked her up and down and said, "Not much now, but she shall be popular in a year." The other replied, "She doesn't need a year. She needs practice." What it meant to work in the Subura. Subura was the slum district of Rome, infamous for its noise, smells, and packed insulae, towering apartment buildings prone to fire and collapse. But it was also the city's engine. Traders, butchers, laborers, and soldiers lived there, and where there were men with coin, there was demand. The brothel she ended up in didn't even have a name, just a carved phallus pointing down an alley. Inside, it was a narrow row of celly, tiny cubicles made of rough brick and cheap curtains. Each room had a straw mattress, a small lamp, and nothing else. No windows, no ventilation. She was assigned to the far left curtain. They gave her a bath, if you could call it that, and rubbed her down with oil to cover the smell of fear. Then the madam handed her a scrap of cloth and said, "Wear this. If you smile, it shall be quicker." Training day 1. No one taught her how to please men. That wasn't the point. What she learned instead was how to take coins and not drop them, how to light the lamp and snuff it out quickly, how to keep the mattress dry and shake the lice out each morning, how to tell if a client was drunk enough to get rough. She was told, never scream, never argue, don't cry where others can see. There were 4 other girls her age. None spoke much. They didn't last long. Some left to work in bathhouses. Others were sold again, this time to traveling troops, or worse, to private estates where no one asked questions. She stayed, hours like stones. Her day began before dawn, scrubbing herself down with cold water and sweeping the corridor. Then she waited. Most business happened in the early evening when the local men returned from labor and had coin to spare. But mornings brought dock workers, night guards, and the occasional senator's slave who needed something quick and cheap. Each session lasted minutes. Some men didn't even speak. Some spoke too much. By the end of the week, she knew what every type of knock meant. Slow and firm, irregular, fast and sloppy, drunk, a scratch instead of a knock, dangerous. The curtain was her world. When she stepped out of it, she was either cleaning up or being moved to another cubicle for repairs. No one asked her name. They called her Little One, New Girl, or later, Number 4, diseases, doches, and damage control. Brothel girls in Rome were considered property. They weren't protected by marriage laws, and they weren't allowed to press charges. If a client injured them, it was chalked up to wear and tear. To avoid infections, they used everything from vinegar douches to herbal sponges. Most of it didn't work. Pregnancies were common. So were miscarriages. When one of the older girls began bleeding and didn't stop, the madam didn't call for a physician, just dragged her mattress out into the alley and told the rest of them to bleach the floor. She was replaced by the end of the week. Moments of almost human. There were a few strange moments that felt like something close to kindness. A boy, no older than 15, came in once shaking so badly he could barely hold a coin. She held his hand and whispered to him until he cried. Then he left without touching her. Another time, a baker brought her a sweet roll wrapped in linen, said he liked her smile. She didn't know how to respond. She hid the roll and ate it that night after the lamps were out. It was the first thing she'd tasted that wasn't bread crust or boiled barley in weeks. She never saw him again. Learning to float, over time, she stopped flinching, stopped hoping the curtain would stay closed. She learned to float, mentally. When men entered, she focused on cracks in the wall, the shape of the flame, anything but the weight on her chest. Other girls whispered tricks, how to fake moans, how to tense just right so it was over faster, how to stash a bit of coin under the mattress in case you needed to run. She never did run. Where would she go? One candle, one choice. Her first act of defiance was instead loud. One night, after an especially rough client had left, she took a stub of candle from the corridor and burned a small mark into the wall of her cell. Just a line. She made a new mark every time she made it through a day without crying. After 2 months, the wall was filled. The madam saw it once and slapped her, told her to stop wasting wax, but the girl didn't. She started using charcoal instead. Whispers from upstairs. There were rumors, always, of girls being chosen by someone important, a patron, a soldier, a rich widow who needed a handmaid. Most of it was fantasy, but once a well-dressed woman came into the brothel. She didn't ask for services, just walked down the corridor, peeking behind each curtain. When she reached the girls' cell, she paused. Their eyes met. The woman said nothing, just handed a coin to the madam and left. The girl never saw her again, but the next day she was given new clothes and moved to a quieter brothel across town, still behind a curtain, still no name, but the mattress was cleaner and the clients paid more. She once stood barefoot in the gutters of the Forum, chasing men for copper coins. Now they came to her house with gifts, favors, and whispers. Her name wasn't in any Senate records, but half the men in the Curia knew it by heart. This is how a former prostitute turned her trade into a business empire and made Rome kneel without ever wearing a laurel. Let's get one thing straight. She wasn't ashamed of where she came from. She'd started on the lower steps of the theater of Marcellus, with a smile and a sandal strap, half broken. Those first years were cold, filthy, and brutal, but she learned fast how to read a man's walk, how to disappear in the shadows, how to avoid the watchmen who only arrested girls who didn't pay their bribes. By the time she turned 30, she had survived a dozen beatings, 3 forced abortions, and 1 near strangulation by a man whose name she never forgot. Most girls didn't last half as long, but she did instead just survive. She learned, and when the time came to step off the street, she knew exactly what kind of brothel she wanted to build. Why the Vicus Tuscus? Most brothels in Rome clustered around the Subura or hid along alleyways behind the Circus Maximus. But she had a different idea. The Vicus Tuscus was a commercial street, perfume shops, fine cloth, imported spices, right at the edge of the Forum. Respectable men walked there, and those were the men she wanted. Not soldiers with grime under their nails, but senators' aides, grain merchants, middle-ranking bureaucrats with wives at home and ambition in their veins. Men who needed somewhere discreet, not cheap. She bought a 2-story property with an inner courtyard and paid to have the walls repainted, real paint, not just chalk dust. She replaced the straw mattresses with pads of lambskin, installed a small fountain, even added privacy screens, unheard of in most brothels. She didn't want the place to smell like sweat and piss. She wanted it to smell like myrrh, citrus, and sex. It worked. The girls she chose. She didn't take in the desperate or the broken, not because she didn't care, but because she was building something specific. Her girls were trained. They knew how to read and write. They were taught how to speak Greek, how to quote Ovid, how to pour wine without spilling. They weren't told to act like slaves. They were performers, and each one played a role. There was the shy virgin who wasn't, the stern domina, the exotic Egyptian born in Ostia, and the well-read widow who could recite Virgil naked. Each had her own room, no curtains, doors with locks. Clients paid triple the usual rate. Who came to visit? At first, just curious merchants and upper-class men bored with their wives. But over time, more powerful names started showing up. A praetor whose wife refused to touch him, a landowner from Africa who needed a place to spend his time between Senate meetings, even a former consul's son, still wearing his toga virilis, nervously handing over a gold ring as if it were a token of love. They came for the sex, yes, but they stayed for the illusion, the comfort, the idea that they were not just rutting in a hole in the wall, but partaking in something refined. Some of them even sent their slaves back with wine, fruit, little trinkets. She accepted everything except disrespect. One senator slapped a girl once. He never came back. No one knew why. Only that his villa caught fire that same week, and that her cousin worked in the fire brigade. Coincidence. The books and the bribes. She kept 2 sets of books, one for appearances neat, tidy, taxes paid. The other was coded. It listed names, debts, favors, owed information, weaknesses. If a man talked in bed, and many did, she remembered, who was skimming grain rations, who was sleeping with his brother's wife, who had a child he paid to keep hidden. Over time, those secrets became currency. She traded them when necessary, used them to protect her girls, to expand her influence. She wasn't Stet, just a madam. She was a power broker. And the men who laughed at her behind closed doors, most of them stopped laughing once they realized how much she knew. Respect, the Roman way. Here steps the irony. Rome worshipped power, not virtue. So even if they called her a lupa, a whore, a stain on the city, if she could wield influence, people listened. She was never invited to proper banquets, but senators came to her for advice. She was never painted on the walls of villas, but slaves whispered her name in kitchens all over the Aventine. Some men offered to buy her out. She refused. She liked being her own master. One tribune tried to shut her down by appealing to public decency. So she invited his cousin for a free night, then sent a slave with a list of other patrons, many of them in office. The case disappeared, legacy, by lamplight. She never married, never had children, at least none she claimed, but she trained a younger girl, sharp, quiet, with a talent for numbers, and named her successor. The girl took over when she was too sick to leave her room. Clients kept coming. Nothing changed. By the time she died, she owned 3 properties, employed 24 girls, and had her debts paid by senators who owed her more than coin. No one buried her in a fancy tomb, just a small marble slab near the Janiculum Hill, inscribed, "Here lies Livia." She saw, she endured, she profited. She wouldn't have wanted anything else. The steam was thick enough to choke. Her first few days there, it felt like drowning. The bathhouse was like a temple to water, hot water, cold water, flowing in marble channels, collecting in pools, dripping from ceilings. The thermae wasn't just where men came to wash, it was where they came to scheme, gossip, show off, and if no one was looking too closely, get serviced. She was purchased as part of a bulk sale from a captured Greek estate. She barely remembered the auction, just the sharp sting of her new owner's Sip's ring as he tugged her forward and said, "She Sip's got clean hands. She said, do." Her job was simple, make rich Roman men feel important. How the bathhouse actually worked, if you're imagining a calm spa, forget it. The public baths were loud, chaotic, and sprawling. The apoditerium changing room echoed with shouting. Slaves argued with vendors. Clumsy patrons dropped oil flasks. Men sat naked and gossiped as if Rome's fate depended on it. From there, men passed through the tepidarium warm room, then the caldarium hot room, and finally the frigidarium cold plunge. Pulchra worked mostly in the caldarium, where the steam curled off the water and sweat pooled between marble tiles. This is where men got their massages. It's also where she was expected to please them. There were no rooms, no privacy, just corners, shadows, quick encounters blurred by the heat and the haze. No one spoke about it. Everyone knew. What she did all day, she helped scrub backs, rubbed oil into tired shoulders, and knelt between thighs when summoned with a flick of the fingers. Some men were polite. Most weren't. A few were cruel. One liked to keep her head underwater while he finished, just to see how long she could hold her breath. Her day started before sunrise. She carried buckets, hauled towels, cleaned vomit off mosaics, shaved men with dull razors. She was allowed to eat once at midday, watered down wine, olives, if lucky, bread too hard to chew properly. When she bled, she stuffed linen between her legs and kept working. No one cared. At night, she slept in the storeroom with 4 other girls. One cried in her sleep. Another stopped talking altogether after being beaten with a sandal. They called her sorta the deaf one, even though she wasn't. Men who wanted more than sex. Now and then, a man would fall in love, or claim to. He'd whisper that he could buy her, take her to his villa, give her better food, better clothes, a softer bed. Some even meant it, but none of them did it. Because here's the truth. For most men, girls like Pulchra were never worth the price of paperwork. They were easier to access than to own. One man, older, soft-voiced, smelled of figs, used to ask her about her dreams. She didn't know what to say. No one had asked before. She told him once that she used to sing. He smiled, then told her not to speak again. That was the closest she ever got to kindness. The politics of the bathhouse. Here's what people forget. The baths weren't just for leisure. They were for networking. Senators and generals negotiated alliances while soaking in hot water. Merchants struck deals on benches while being scrubbed. And all the while, girls like Pulchra were right there, silent, unseen, listening. She learned names, learned which men were enemies, which ones hated their wives, who was stealing from the temple fund. Once she warned a visiting client, a young noble with nervous eyes, that another patron was planning to accuse him of treason. He paid her in pearls. She hid them in the sole of her sandal and never told anyone. Later, she traded one pearl to a guard to look the other way while she spent a night in the servant's kitchen, dry and warm and alone. Moments of rebellion. They couldn't run. The walls were too high, and even if they escaped, where would they go? They had no papers, no names, but they resisted in smaller ways. Pulchra once slipped castor oil into a patron's wine after he bruised her arm. He spent the night vomiting and never returned. Another time, she hid a wax tablet under her tunic and scratched out a message in Greek to a visiting merchant, one who still remembered the old language. It said simply, "I was once a person." He left her a fig the next day. Just that, but in a place like the Thermae, where your body was a tool and your silence was expected, even a fig could feel like a revolution. How it ended, for her and others, she didn't die in the baths. One day the owner sold her, along with a bundle of linens and a brass oil lamp, to a Lupanar in Pompeii. The bathhouse went on without her. New girls arrived. Steam still poured from the vents. Rich men still lounged and leered and schemed, but she never forgot that place. Even years later, when she was older and harder and less willing to kneel, She would still hear the hiss of the water and smell the sweet rot of old sweat and perfume. She didn't state mourn it. She survived it. And in a city like Rome that counted for something, the neighbors said she had once been beautiful. They said she had lived in a grand house, that senators used to climb her steps in silence, late at night, their faces cloaked, their intentions not, that she had once dared to bed a Vestal virgin, and that when the gods found out, they punished everyone involved except her. Now, she was old, bent, draped in a faded red veil, face always hidden. Children ran from her. Grown men crossed themselves when she passed. The local wine merchant swore her shadow killed his vines. She lived alone on the Aventine Hill, in a crumbling villa that smelled of dust and fennel seeds. No visitors, no laughter, only the low creak of doors and the soft pad of bare feet in hallways no longer swept. But at night, if you leaned close to her walls, you could hear her talking to herself, to ghosts, to the past. Her real name was Tertia. She had once been called Tertia Aemilia, the third daughter of a freedwoman midwife and a Greek scribe, born with a cleft lip that healed unevenly. Her mother wept when she saw her, but her father simply said, "She still survive, she still do." She was sold to a Leno pimp at age 13, said to be quick-witted, sharp-tongued, with eyes like smelted bronze. Her lip didn't matter in the dark. For nearly 20 years, she worked the highest circles, not a street girl, a meretrix urbana, a registered legal prostitute with fine gowns, perfumed limbs, and well-placed connections. Her clients included poets, actors, gladiators, a man who would one day become consul, and a woman who was never supposed to be touched. The night with the Vestal. It began as a dare. Tertia had just turned 30, no longer in demand, but not yet dismissed. She drank too much that evening, sweet southern wine, thick and red. A client told her, with a cruel grin, that no one in Rome had ever bedded a Vestal and lived. Tertia raised her cup and said, "Then Rome needs better women." The Vestal's name was Calpurnia. 18, pale as flour, lips like fig skin. They met during a festival, a secret night, arranged through whispered notes and stolen glances. Vestal virgins were sacred, chosen before puberty, sworn to 30 years of chastity. Touching one was punishable by death, burial alive for the Vestal, beheading for the man. There were no punishments for a woman, because no one imagined a woman would ever dare. The rumors, the fear, the curse. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin. Servants talked, wine loosened tongues. A poet published a veiled epigram about fire shared between holy thighs. The Vestal was recalled to the house of the Vestals. Tertia was not summoned. She was simply shunned. Clients stopped coming. Her name vanished from invitations. One night, someone threw ash at her door. Soon after, a plague swept through the district. Calpurnia died, found drowned in the sacred pool. Her body was hidden, no funeral, no fire. And that's when people started saying Tertia had cursed her, that the gods had spared her because she had become something worse than sacred, untouchable. A new kind of power, alone and discarded. Tertia did not fade. She adapted. She began charging coin for curses. People came to her with scraps of hair, wax figures, names carved into lead tablets. They wanted lovers punished, rivals hexed, fortunes twisted. She never said no. She always asked for silence. Her home filled with amulets, charms, bones. Some claimed she called down a hailstorm that ruined a senator's vineyard. Others swore she made a merchant's wife miscarry just by looking at her. None of it could be proven. But in a city where gods were everywhere and logic had limits, that didn't matter. What mattered was fear, and for the first time in her life, Tertia didn't depend on men. They came to her, and they left with trembling hands. The boy who didn't set believe. Years later, a boy from the neighborhood, a cocky apprentice baker, dared to mock her. He followed her in the street, bleeding like a goat, calling her the Virgin's widow. He spat near her sandal. She said nothing. She just looked at him. That night, he collapsed during dinner. Foaming at the mouth, his family begged her to undo it. She told them, flatly, "I didn't do anything. He did. He lived, but never spoke again. Walked with a limp, never married. She never charged that family. She simply told them, let that be the price." The final years, she aged slowly. Her bones shrank. Her skin grew thin and dry like papyrus. But her mind remained sharp. She remembered everyone, every insult, every kindness. She kept a list scratched into a wall behind a loose brick, names with lines through them, names without. Some nights, she would speak aloud, softly, reciting prayers, not to gods, but to people she had known, the Vestal Calpurnia, her first lover, the girl who taught her how to tie knots in silk with her tongue. She never left the hill. One day, a fire broke out in a granary nearby. The flames stopped one street short of her villa. People said they saw her on the roof, arms raised, veil blowing, shouting something in Greek. No one dared to get closer. What this really tells us, her story, part fact, part fear, part fantasy, survived not because it was written down, but because it refused to die. In Rome, power didn't always come from birth or wealth. Sometimes it came from silence, memory, and the ability to make others wonder what you might be capable of. Tertia lived as a prostitute, was cast aside as a pariah, and died as a myth. In her own way, she outlived every man who ever bought her, and in the flicker of every red candle lit in a Roman household, her shadow remained. Let's be honest, Roman prostitution wasn't a single job. It was a fractured, slippery thing, wrapped in law, myth, survival, pleasure, shame, and economics. The women we've met over the past few hours, slave girls, freed women, performers, innkeepers, rebels, even self-made legends, shared one label, but their lives couldn't have been more different. Some worked in public toilets. Others lived in velvet-draped villas. Some were raped into the trade before puberty. Others entered it by choice, with ambition. A few left. Most didn't. All had to navigate a world that saw them as both necessary and disposable. And yet they endured, adapted, manipulated the very system that oppressed them. They knew the games men played, and sometimes they played back, smarter. So what did Roman prostitutes do all day? They worked. They walked. They counted coins. They dodged beatings. They kissed strangers. They prayed. They smeared on rouge. They wept alone. They laughed with each other. They listened to gossip. They memorized men's secrets. They negotiated, conned, performed, endured, disappeared. They were never allowed to forget what they were, but Rome, beneath its marble and its statues and its laws, was built on people like them, the nameless, the used, the surviving. So when we ask that question, what did they do all day? The better question might be, what did instead they do?